We're at our favorite U-Pick orchard again to get about 30 or 40 pounds for number one daughter. We're going to freeze dry them, and then she'll be able to rehydrate them for making pie. We'll make sure that they're peeled and ready to use for pies. But boy, these trees are just absolutely loaded. Look at that. Wow. This is... Boy. Yeah, the apples are just so thick on these. We can get 30 or 40 pounds without even moving.
They're little.
And there's tons of them so low, even short people can get a bunch. The higher ones are more golden. The lower ones are still more green. So it depends on where they are on the tree. I mean, if you see these, see, more golden up high versus the low one, more green. I mean, quite a difference between them, just depending on where you pick on the tree.
Yeah, just so abundant. So I don't even have to move.
Yeah, they're just loaded trees again this year. My daughter said she went to a U-Pick place where she's at, and they were $1.50 to $3 a pound for U-Pick. Ours are still 50 cents a pound here. They have a few varieties of apples, and the trees are just absolutely loaded. And I mean, they have some ladders, but you almost never need a ladder because you could fill up hundreds and hundreds of pounds and never leave the ground. Filled up these 2 boxes in just a minute or two without ever having to move where our feet were. We picked in this little spot right here and still barely made a dent in the number of apples in this spot. So we're working on the second freeze dryer batch of the apples from that last picking. So we've got the Pippins done. Now we're going to start working on the Golden Delicious. I didn't bother showing all of it, and I've got other apple videos, so I'm not going to show all that much detail either. It's just if I think of things that really need to be talked about or just babbling, I'm going to kind of put those in there. So let's get these started and get them on the trays. So this is the kind of setup we're using. Got the box of apples, the peeler. We'll peel, core, slice the apples, come over here, cut them in half, and put them in the water with the ascorbic acid, the vitamin C. So I've got a tablespoon for 2 quarts of water. I don't know if that's the right concentration. I really need to do an actual testing. So let's get that started. I've got my little laser piece there, and you certainly don't have to do that. I just like that because now I can line that core up, or those prongs, to the center of that, and then make sure that the laser part is at the blossom end and push it straight in. And we are going to peel these, so put the peel piece into place, and that's spring loaded so that it follows around, and away it goes. Then pull the apple off. Apple comes over. We look to see if the core is all out of there, because sometimes with some of the apples, the core is bigger in diameter, and you'll end up with pieces of the seed and core in there. So then when that happens, we'll show it. And then on into the water with the ascorbic acid. Just kind of peel them apart a little bit. And repeat. They look great inside. And if they have too much peel, I won't put that in there either, because we plan on using these for apple pie filling. Then I'm using a set of my sister's freeze dryer trays also, because mine are already in the machine and I wanted to get 2 sets of them going, and I didn't want to transfer all of them. Usually I don't worry about it. So let's see how many we can get onto the tray. They will be pretty tall because I'm not going to carefully stack every slice, and that's what it would take to get them, to keep them short. And I'm just not going to worry about that. We'll get this into the freezer for pre-freezing, and as soon as the other batch is done and the machine's defrosted, then these can go in. And we'll weigh those, of course. So that's all we'll do today. We'll get those baled out of there and then get them on the tray and then in the freezer for pre-freezing. And that's enough for the second batch of these apples. And not getting 10 pounds because I'm not bothering to stack them. And if you cut them in quarters or smaller, then you can pile them much better on the tray. But this shape, it just doesn't cover as well, so it ends up taller. Anyway, that's the shape we want for what we're doing right now. So that's what we're going to have. And we'll get about 8 pounds in a batch instead of 10 pounds. So we'll get those drained on the tray in the freezer for pre-freezing. Next time we see them, they'll be getting ready for the freeze dryer. The temperatures on the trays have been up for at least 6 hours. And what I mean by up is as close to the set temperature, the drying temperature, as they usually get. So the top and bottom ones were about 110, and they rarely go over that when it's set for 120, and that's what it's set for right now. The second one was at 120, and the third one made it to 130. Anyway, now we're going to bypass the last few minutes, get them out, and start the dry check. And I know I've said it a lot of times, the dry check is just a process of weighing them. It only takes a minute. Literally, I can take them out, weigh them, and put them back in. I've done it in under a minute. Typically, it's about 2 minutes, maybe a little longer when I'm trying to do a video of it. The reason for the process is to find out if they're dry now. To find out if they're dry now, I'm going to weigh them now, put them back in, give it more final dry time for 2 or 3 more hours, and then weigh it again. If it doesn't change, if it doesn't drop weight, then I know they're dry now. If it does drop more weight, then I know it wasn't dry right now and it needed more time. Well, then I'll do another dry check to see if it's stopped losing weight. If it stopped losing weight, then it's stopped losing moisture. I can be pretty confident that it's dry. There's no other really simple way to tell if it's dry. A lumber moisture meter cannot tell you if this food is properly dry. And it certainly can't tell you if all of it's dry. Even if it did work, it can only check from where the one probe is to where the other probe is. That space in between. It can't tell you anything about what's out here. Some of them are non-contact, don't have probes, but it's still the same thing. It's just checking in a very small area. A thermal camera can tell you if it's warm everywhere. It can't tell you if it's dry. If you take a bag of rice, put it out in the sunshine, it'll show you that it's completely warm through and through everywhere. But it's still not dry. It can still be 7% moisture. That's more moisture than I want in my food when I'm going to store it. There are water activity meters that can tell you if it's dry. but it will still only tell you if the sample piece that you're using is dry. It's by far the best kind of way to check that it's dry. This is a simpler way for most of us home users, is just simply weigh it until it stops losing weight. The thermometers in the food are to tell me that it's worth checking to start the dry check. If I have thermometers in the middle of the food or slightly below middle, ideally it would be about 1/3 off the tray with 2/3 of the food on top of the thermometer. If I have it in there and I've set the trays for 120 degrees and it's only made it to 60 degrees, can't be dry yet. It's still finishing the primary drying and into the secondary drying phase. If the thermometers show that there's a frozen spot still, well then two things. There's no point on taking it out because it probably won't be dry. And also, if I do take it out when it's below freezing, I'm going to get instant condensation on all of my food and trays, ruining the work I've done already to dry it. Let's get past this last bit and open the drain valve and get them out and check them. As soon as the pressure is equalized, we'll be able to open the door and get them out. Okay, so tray one, and I will put them back in and I'll rotate the positions. I'll put this tray here and the bottom tray up here because these two shelves are almost always slightly warmer, 10-15 degrees warmer than these two. So tray one is at 930 grams now. Tray two, and these are the Pippin apples, and they definitely tend to turn color quicker. 917, and I'm going to include this in a whole video that I'm working on, but it's important to not have any fans blowing on it or near it when you're doing this weight check. A fan blowing on it will give you a false reading of too high of a weight. A fan blowing under it can give you a false reading of too low of a weight. It can actually lift the tray up 2 or 3 grams. That's why my old machine doesn't have a bottom on it, and so the fan, the air coming out of there, can come underneath and lift it up, and that's why I have this foam piece here. Now put these back in. Okay, and tray 3, 925, and tray 4, 934. Okay, I'll get those back in. Tray 4 I'll put up a spot, and then tray 3 I'll put down a spot. Yeah, so depending on what the condition of the apple was ahead of time, some of them turned brown more than others, and that happened before I even got them into the freeze dryer, because I didn't show these going into the freeze dryer. So we'll get that put back in there. Yeehaw! Now with the drain valve closed, I'll restart this, so more dry time. Close the drain valve, I did. Continue and restart. The way I have these apples on there, I've got them stacked pretty high on the trays. So to ensure that they've had chance for the heat to travel through it from top and bottom and make sure they're dry, I'll probably come back in about 3 hours and check them instead of just 2. So we'll be back in just a minute and check them to see if they're dry. In the meantime, I need to figure out how I'm going to label these also, because the plan for these was to send them to number 1 daughter for potential pie filling later. So I need to label it with how to rehydrate these for using for pie. I think I would recommend adding some fruit fresh or ascorbic acid to the water for rehydrating to make sure that they don't turn brown even more than they are, or put them in a saucepan and actually cook them right away instead of putting them into a pie filling or into a pie crust. Anyway, we'll figure out that, and we can always change the labeling later, or just know that this is what the apples are and figure out how to deal with them later. So we'll be back in just a second. I'm back. It's been about 3.5 hours. The top and bottom trays are showing 110 degrees. The middle 2 are showing 120. And you probably noticed mine's the older 4-tray machine. I know the newer ones are 5 trays, but it's the medium machine. Anyway, so I don't know on the 5-tray Are the top and bottom ones still cooler? I assume they are, just because of the proximity to all the coldness. We'll get them out of there and check them to see if they were done 3.5 hours ago, because that's what we're checking. We're not actually checking to see if they're done now. We're checking to see if they were done before we started the test. So we'll bypass the rest of that time again, and then open the drain valve and get them out. All right, with the pressures equalized, we can get them out. So starting with tray 1, if you remember, I switched them, so tray 1 is down here now. That is down in 3.5 hours, and it keeps jumping back to the same number. So I'm going to call that no change, 3.5 hours. Tray 2, no change. Tray 3, and I do need to make sure that it's not touching those so that it doesn't affect the weight. No change. I'm going to set it over here for a second. And tray 4. And no change. I'm going to stop the machine with no defrost. Make it quieter in here. And we'll get these moved over to the bagging area. I'm going to put the little defrost baffle in there, which helps direct the air in at the top and then out through the bottom to get a good circulation of air. And it keeps the door from swinging shut and hitting and closing. So we had about 9.2 pounds of these apples, and these apples were Pippins, which are kind of a more sour apple for baking. And sometimes the more sour ones turn color more. It's going to be fine for any pie though, so we're not going to worry about it at all. Let's get them taken care of. First thing we're going to do is remove the thermometers from the trays and get the final weights. So 922, 921. Now with these, because I don't have my labels ready, because I wasn't sure how I was going to bag these, I'm going to get them all into a 2-gallon bag to protect them from atmosphere moisture as they cool off. So we'll just get those all in there. They wouldn't all fit in one bag, so I'm going to put them in 2. I don't know if you're interested in seeing this, but here's the information. I have the tare weight of the tray, so that's the tray and the piece of paper. And then this is what it weighed with the apples on it. Subtract that out, that gives me the weight of the apples, which was 4,169 grams, which is about 9.2 pounds. The dry check weights are meaningless. They're only to compare what it weighs before the beginning of the dry check and after, and I note sometimes how long it was in there. So as long as it didn't lose any weight or no significant weight, then it's good to go. So afterwards, I have the gross weight again of the trays with the paper plus the apples. Subtract out the tray weight again, and that gives you the net weight. So the total of the apples afterwards was 683 grams. With the 9.2 pounds, that works out to about 74.2 grams per pound. So I'll probably try to bag it in 1-pound bags. That'll probably take a 2-quart bag, so it'd be 9 bags. We'll find out. So on this set of apples, I wasn't real sure how to bag these because the plan is to use these for some pies. So I decided to go with a big bag, gallon bags. We rarely use anything that big nowadays. We're going to put 2 pounds in each one of these bags, and we'll put the remainder, which is just over 1 pound, into this one. And it is important to remember there's a lot of different size bags you can get. I mean, I have the gallon, the 2-quart, the 1-quart, the pint. We use mostly the 1-quart, but my sister uses a lot more pint bags than anything else. When we first started freeze drying, we used mostly gallons and 2 quarts. But as we downsized, our bags downsized. So now the quart bag works better for us most of the time. The cute little pint bag holds just the right amount of some things, even if you have multiple people. So if you're doing, for instance, cocktail sauce for shrimp, a pint bag might be plenty. But if you're doing apples for pies, you might need a 2-quart bag or even a gallon bag. And if you know you're going to do lots of big batches of things, you might even want bigger than a gallon bag. I need 148 grams of the apples in there. That should fit easily in there. Tear that out, and then add in 148 grams of the apples. And I want to make sure that they don't get crushed or broken. That's part of the reason why I decided to go with a bigger bag. Oh, there is approximately 2 pounds of apples. And when I say 2 pounds of apples, of course it's not 2 pounds of apples now. That's 2 pounds of apples before it was dried, and after it's rehydrated, it'll be 2 pounds again. Right now it's only 148 grams, so just over 5 ounces, about 5 1/4 ounces. So kind of shake them down there a little bit to nestle them in there so that the bag will close without crushing them. And it also wouldn't take as big a bag if the pieces weren't so big. So if those were cubed apples, for instance, they would nestle together so much easier. Okay, well that pretty much nails it. 4 2-pound bags, 1 1-pound bag. Now the oxygen absorbers. For the oxygen absorbers, especially since these gallon bags are full, I would typically use a 500 cc. I don't want to open any 500 cc's for just 4 of them. I'm going to use 2 of the 300s in each one of these and 1 of the 300s in the 2-quart bag. So I'll put 2 in each one of the gallon bags and kind of move them over as I do them. And then I need to get 1 more, or 2 more for that one. Going to show, I've shown this a lot of times, so you've probably seen this. That's the little oxygen sensor. And I'm going to cut the bag open and then open it up. And you can see it's already starting to turn color, even though it's still deep in that bag. It does not take much oxygen at all to make that thing switch. Okay, 2 in that one. We'll reseal the bag, and by tomorrow that'll be back to pink oxygen free. Resealed the bag, put the number of what's left in there. That's ready for another time. And I'm not going to worry about pushing out any extra air in these after all, because they're quite full. And some of the apple slices are going to end up breaking as the bag sucks down. I'm using an Impact brand sealer, one of the brands of machines for sealers that I had used for decades. And when I got my harvest right, this was the type that they were sending out with it. And if you'd seen my video, you'll know that this isn't the original one I had, because I accidentally pushed the other one off the side of the table and onto the concrete floor and it broke. So I bought a new one of the same variety. So I've got it sealed real high up on the bag, which means I can cut that seal off and put another seal under it if I want to use just part of it. Or if I've messed up on that seal and it has wrinkles or anything in it, I have room for 2 or 3 more tries before I get to the zipper. These aren't staying here, so I'm not even going to be putting these on the shelf, but I still want to put the weight on it. So I'm putting the gross weight of this whole bag as it sits right now on that corner. That way, if it starts to get heavier, I'll know that water is starting to get through this bag, which most likely means that I've got a bad seal, there's a bad edge on it, or it got a puncture. Those are ready to go to number one child to make pies out of. We have multiple more batches that are coming with the Golden Delicious that we picked. So I'm going to kind of put those together a lot. So here comes some more apples. So thanks for watching and stay tuned for more apples. So we're prepping some more of the apples. Right now the freeze dryer trays are already filled. One set's in the freeze dryer and I'm using my sister's spare set and it's in the freezer. The rest of these apples that I'm going to do right now are just going to go on cookie sheets instead. So they've got a seal pad on them and then we'll stack them probably 3 or 4 layers high and we'll keep them in layers and all nice and even stacked up so it'll be easier to transfer to the trays later. I could, I suppose, just wait until the next batch is in and the trays are empty, but I have time to process apples right now, so I'm going to do some more of them right now, because we have quite a few left to do. So I've got my laser on, that tells me where the center is, and then I just look at the blossom end. Okay. So it's one long piece right now. Okay, going to put that in the solution, and this is a quart or about 1 liter of water with a tablespoon of the vitamin C powder, the ascorbic acid. So get this one filled and then start on the next one. We'll get these in the freezer. So the machine is defrosted now. We're going to get the next batch going. It's another batch of apples, as I mentioned before. We've got the disc in, which is not required, but I find that it helps keep the condensation issues to a minimum. In fact, it just basically makes the condensation problem go away. Here's the water from the last batch of apples. So it was 9.2 pounds of apples. We've got almost 1 gallon of water out of there. Going to get it pre-cooling, and as soon as it's below freezing or below the temperature of the freezers, so about 5 degrees Fahrenheit, then we'll get the apples in here. So making sure the drain valve is closed, it is. And I have it set currently for a 7-hour freeze time, and it probably doesn't need that much because the food will be pre-frozen. So probably 4 or 5 hours would be plenty, and I can adjust it downward if I see the thermometers in the apples cold enough beforehand. That's one of the beauties of having the thermometers in the food, is I can adjust the time on the fly according to the temperature of the food. I don't have to rely on just the rack temperature where the probe is. So that's all there is about that. We'll see that in a minute. So these are the bags from yesterday, the batch from yesterday that we finished. And I didn't restart the machine right away because it was late enough at night that I didn't want to bother defrosting it and then re-chilling it and getting it going before it was too late. That's why we started it a few minutes ago. I like to leave the bags out a day or so before I put them in storage to make sure that all the oxygen absorbers are working. If one of these bags didn't get sucked down the same as the others, then I would worry about that one bag. So this gives me a chance to check to make sure that they're all working about the same. They're all getting all squished down. You know, that 21% of that volume has been sucked down. And it's hard to tell on some types of products if it's getting down by 21%. So if it was really puffy, 21% might not be as noticeable. But when it's a fairly tight pack, it really shows up. Another reason I wait is because I'm lazy and I can put it off for another day. So we'll get these moved out of the way. We'll get the next set of apples ready. We'll get the little metal rod out that we put in there. And that's just the place for the thermometer. And we'll get them weighed. So 1534. And then tuck the thermometer into the space where that rod was. So this has been pre-cooling for a little over an hour now. It says that the tray temperature is -1, and the barrel temperature is about -30. So it's plenty cold to put them in. And starting at the bottom with tray 4. The apples are in there. I've got a good ring around the seal, so I know it's well sealed. I don't have to worry about it sucking air in through there. And we'll be back in about 2 days to check them. I know I've said it a bunch of times, but thermometers are not required for the process. I just find them as an extremely useful tool. I'd consider it my second most important tool right after the scale, which I use for the dry check process. Weighing it for portioning and things, you could just decide, just scoop up what you want and put it in a bag. But the dry check is a great part of the process to make sure that it's being dried all the way before you bag it. So we'll be back in about 2 days, so don't go away, it'll be just a second. And in the meantime, we'll be processing more apples to get them in the freezer for ready for the next batches. So we've got at least another batch coming after this one. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I've been talking about cutting some dividers for the little pans that I use for pre-freezing out of some 1/2-inch thick cutting board material. It's high density polyethylene, so HDPE. Laser Guy 2 sent me a few of the ones that he's made. I have my cutting board material. I've had it for 1.5 years. I just haven't got around to cutting them. Anyway, so he cut some with his CNC machine and then added some magnets in the bottom with some stainless steel pieces. So you could put these in the dishwasher. So I'm going to try these out the next time I do something with the pans, because right now with the apples I don't need that. So anyway, they look really well made. I'm going to give those a try. I'm back to check the Golden Delicious batch, and these are the ones that I just dumped onto the trays. So they're really pretty tall in there and all jumbled up, so they don't get really good heat transfer like you would if you stacked them in nice even layers, so that the heat can get through all of those layers easily, transmit through the food. So it's kind of like insulation almost, the way they're jumbled up in there. So it does take longer. It says it's been about 53 hours, but that includes the freeze time, and I gave it about 8 hours of freeze time. And it also includes the fact that it was ready to check about 6 hours ago, but I didn't come down and check it, I just added more time. In fact, my machine keeps adding time on there even while it's waiting for you to come and check it. Anyway, we'll get it out and check it now, and then get them back in for the first round of the dry check. It's probably done, but I won't know until it's had a few hours for the dry check. So let's get that started. So I'll bypass the last few minutes. With the pressure equalized, we can get it open. Starting at the top with tray 1. And those are good looking apples. 780, 786. Now we'll put those back up and switch the positions. And tray 3, 778, and tray 4. Tray 1 and 4 are noticeably cooler than tray 2 and 3. 767. Okay, now we'll switch those positions too. Tray 4 will go up to where 3 was, and 3 will come down to the bottom. Yeah, they're looking marvelous. Okay, we'll get that restarted and come back and check it in a couple hours, or 3. So I've got the drain valve closed, and I'll restart it by adding more dry time. It reminds me to close the valve. I did. Continue and go. So we'll come back in 2 or 3 hours and check it to make sure that it was already dry now. So if it doesn't lose any weight, we'll be ready to bag them. I gave it 2.5 hours for this dry check, or 3.5. not really sure. I'd have to look at the details. We got busy doing other stuff, and so we didn't get back to it, but I had given it a lot of time, so I didn't have to worry about it stopping and cooling back down. So it's showing the top and bottom trays are about 110 degrees still. The middle two are 120. And if you remember, I switched the top and bottom to the middle two. So now they've had a chance for that higher temperature in case there was any water remaining in there. And at this point, it wouldn't be liquid water or ice water, it would be bound water, because we're well into the secondary drying phase. At the end of the primary drying phase, you can tell that that part's done because it is starting to get warm. So when people say, well, you can just feel it and it's warm. Yes, but that could be just the end of the primary drying phase. And it still needs the secondary drying phase to get the moisture level down low enough for safe storage for long term. Even after the primary drying phase, it's still drier than typical dehydrated food. It's still going to be good for months, maybe years. I want it to be good for decades. Anyway, let's get the last of that bypassed, the last of the time. We'll get the drain valve open and get them checked. Pressure is equalized. We'll get them out. Tray 1. It's down 1 gram for that total in, oh, I did write it down. What time is it now? So it was 2.5 hours. So it's been 2.5 hours. It's down only 1 gram. So if that's the most of any of them, we'll go ahead and take it out. But we will note it that it's down that much. So the current weight is 779. It was 780. Now let's double check. Fans are off. Zero the scale out. Make sure that it's not giving us a false reading. Nope, 779. So it's down a single gram in 2.5 hours. That should be good, as long as none of the others are worse than that. And that one has no change. Great. Looking promising. Tray 3, and we'll check underneath to make sure it's not touching. Okay, there's airspace under it, so it's not touching. And no change. And tray 4. And no change. Okay, so out of the entire batch of apples, we have a total of about 1 gram of loss. I'm comfortable with that. We'll move these over and we'll come right back to get the other stuff done. We'll get that turned off with no defrost. And currently it says that it's 55.5 hours. We know that since there's only a single gram with all of it, we can back that up 2.5 hours ago. So 53 hours. It was probably a little bit less than that. And because of the jumble of apples, I'm not terribly surprised. If I'd taken them, well, we have a batch like that in my sister's and more coming up, where the apple slices are stacked 3 layers tall, but stacked. That means the bottom layer is in contact with the tray all the way across the bottom layer. The top layer is exposed evenly to the heat above it coming down. And the middle layer, as the heat transfers through it, it's going to get heated more evenly. So it should dry faster than a batch that's jumbled up like that. Anyway, we'll get this one defrosting and we'll check the power usage. And for people that care, that batch took 32.45 kilowatt hours to complete. And so for an hour in our area, that would be about $3.50, $4. Okay, now the bagging. These are some gorgeous apples. We'll get the thermometer taken out and get the final weights. 770. 759. We'll take that gross weight, subtract the tray, the tare weight, and that will give me the weight of the apples. Okay, got the math on those, and the Golden Delicious have less solids than the Pippins did. So these are lighter per pound now that they're dried. And again, when I refer to pounds now, I'm referring to what they weighed when they were still wet and what they would weigh if you put the water back in. So these need 394 grams of water put back in to equal a pound, along with 58.9 grams of the apples. So that's why we're going to bag them as 1 pound bags, because again, these will most likely be used for pie making. So I've got my bags labeled. I'm using 2-quart bags, and I'm going to put a pound in each one, which will leave a little bit left over that I'll probably just have to snack. Or I could add them to the next batch, just leave them in a bag until then. We'll see how many there are. It'd be about a ½ pound, I think. So I need about 58.9 grams of the apples to equal what was a pound when they still had water in them. And I don't have to worry about them falling out, so yeah. Gotta kind of shake them down so they nestle down in there to be able to get that many in there. So that's 1 pound of apples before they were freeze dried, and it'll be a pound again if we add all the water back in. Okay, and there should be about a ½ pound left on this one. And I can keep that until the next batch is done, and then we can combine them. Or we can have a ½ pound bag, or a little bit less. I'm going to use 300 cc oxygen absorbers in these. And normally I probably wouldn't, because 2-quart bag, if you filled it full and it was 2 quarts, well, 2 liters, you would have about 420 cc's of oxygen. But these are not quite full, and so I'm going to have a little bit less in there. You can see it's going to be a little bit lower, and I've tested these oxygen absorbers, and I know that they'll pull out at least 600 cc's from the testing. So the fact that I'm going to have around 300, so it's going to be just about maxed, but they have the ability to pull out far, far more than they're rated, I'm not going to worry about it. So we'll drop one in the top, move it aside so that I don't lose my place. One more. Then we'll reseal this. These can wait till the next use. We'll get these closed. We'll pull them closed, kind of push out a little bit of extra air, and zipper them shut. I'll get these sealed, and we're going to seal it as high up on the bag as we can to leave room for additional seals. And I need room for additional seals in case, 1, I mess up and I do a poor job on sealing it, or 2, I want to cut that seal off, use some of it, and have space to reseal it. So I've got a nice smooth seal, real high up on the bag, no wrinkles, no holes through it. So the last thing we're going to do before we put these away, well, and again, these are being shipped to number 1 daughter probably. We're going to add the gross weight on each bag so we know what it weighs now, so we can monitor it, make sure that nothing is getting in that bag. If it starts to get heavier, then we'll know that we have a bad bag. Either the bag is bad, it has a puncture, the bad seal, something is wrong with that bag to allow moisture to get in there and for it to get heavier. That would be a really bad thing. 89 grams. And if it's bouncing between 2, we take the higher number, 89 grams. This bag, as it is right now, weighs 89 grams. If it starts to get heavy, we'll know. These will stay here until, a day or so to make sure that the oxygen absorbers are actually working. We'll be able to see them shrink noticeably over the next day with these absorbers. The ones I used 7 years ago could take 2 or 3 days before you saw it happen. These will see that in a few hours. Those are ready for later. So with that batch done, we're ready to go on to the next ones. I will be putting at least 2 more batches of apples in my machine. There's still a batch of apples in my sister's machine. We'll check that later tonight. I don't know if we'll add that to this video or not, or if it just gets too redundant and boring. I'll kind of look at it and see what I think as I'm editing. Sometimes I just cut out a lot of stuff. But as you know, I usually have a long video. So thanks for watching and following along, and stay tuned for the next ones.